The blizzard outside the Royal Saladino Palace roared at 40 below zero, cold enough to freeze flesh black in minutes. But the hearts of the nobles inside, draped in silk and drunk on rare wine, were colder still. While the kingdom's elite celebrated the king's coronation anniversary with roasted pheasant and champagne that cost more than a commoner's yearly wages, a beautiful Omega named Margarita Epperly lay crumpled in the snow beyond the palace gates, her ice blue gown frozen to her skin, her platinum hair crusted with frost. She had been thrown into the storm as punishment, drugged and helpless, wearing nothing but an elegant dress that provided no more warmth than gossamer. No one cared. No one noticed until the most feared ruler in the northern kingdoms, Alpha King Rodney Saladino, felt a pull in his chest that shouldn't exist and looked out into the storm to see a body half buried in the snowdrift, diamonds still glittering at her throat. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a massacre that would drench the palace floors in noble blood and crown an Omega queen from the ashes of the old order. Hello, friends. Before we journey deeper into Margarita's story, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here matters. Now, let's continue. The crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, each flame reflecting off diamond tiaras and gold-threaded gowns until the very air seemed to shimmer. The vaulted ceiling soared 3 stories high, painted with murals of ancient wolf kings, and the orchestra's music floated above the hum of aristocratic conversation and clinking champagne flutes. It was the winter coronation feast, the most important night in the Royal Saladino calendar, the 5th anniversary of King Rodney's reign, when the kingdom celebrated power, prosperity, and the iron fist that kept them safe from the chaos beyond their borders. Margarita adjusted the silk bodice of her ice blue gown, her fingers trembling as she wove through the crowd of nobles who parted around her like she carried a plague. The trembling wasn't from cold, not yet, but from the suffocating dread that had been her constant companion for 3 years. She had been trapped in this palace since her family's territory was absorbed into Rodney's kingdom, kept as a political hostage disguised as an honored guest, forced to endure this performance to keep her younger sister alive in the Duchess of Wintermarch's clutches. She had learned the rules quickly: be invisible when possible, be decorative when required, be a ghost in a glittering gown, and never, ever let them see how much you want to run. Rodney Saladino stood at the high table with his crown weighing heavy on his head, the gold and sapphires pressing into his temples like a vice. Another noble was giving another toast, the 7th tonight, and he could barely force himself to maintain the mask of regal interest. Duke something or other droning on about stability and prosperity and the king's magnificent leadership. The words washed over him like meaningless noise. But his wolf was anything but bored. It had been prowling beneath his skin all evening, pacing and snarling, claws scraping against his control. Demanding something. Searching for something. The restlessness was maddening, an itch he couldn't scratch, a hunger he couldn't name. He'd ruled for 5 years without his wolf ever behaving like this, and the lack of explanation made him want to shift and tear something apart just to release the pressure building in his chest. Then it hit him. A pull so powerful it felt like a fist closing around his heart and yanking. His knees buckled. His wine glass exploded in his grip, shards of crystal and burgundy wine spraying across white linen. The sound shattered the Duke's speech mid-sentence. His wolf roared inside his mind with such primal force that his vision went gold at the edges. Mate. Mate. Ours. Dying. The word dying punched through his consciousness like a knife between the ribs. Every head in the ballroom turned toward him. The orchestra's music faltered and died. 300 nobles froze, champagne flutes halfway to lips, eyes wide as they watched their king's face transform from controlled boredom to something feral and terrifying. Rodney's eyes blazed pure gold, his canines lengthening, his claws extending as his wolf fought for dominance. He didn't fight it. He let it rise, let it take what it needed, because that pull was dragging him forward with the inevitability of gravity. He stalked toward the palace doors. Nobles scrambled out of his path, pressing themselves against columns and walls, some dropping into submission bows, others simply fleeing. He registered none of them. His entire world had narrowed to that pull, that desperate yanking sensation, leading him outside, into the cold, into the storm. He hit the main doors at a run and shoved them open. The blizzard slammed into him with the force of a physical blow, wind howling, snow driving into his face like tiny knives. His formal jacket and crown meant nothing against cold that could kill in minutes. But he barely felt it. He followed the bond, because that's what it was. He understood that now with crystalline clarity, down the palace steps, across the courtyard, toward the main gates. His enhanced vision cut through the whiteout conditions, searching, desperate. Then he saw her. A shape in the snow. Small. Still. Half buried. He ran, his boots pounding through knee-deep drifts, and dropped to his knees beside her body. She was stunning even in death. Platinum blonde hair frozen solid, spread across the snow like a halo of ice. Skin so pale it was nearly translucent, tinged blue at the lips and fingertips. An ice blue gown that clung to curves now rigid with cold, the silk covered in frost that sparkled in the palace lights. Diamonds at her throat catching the light like frozen tears. Margarita Epperly. He knew her name suddenly, pulled it from the bond between them. His mate. His fated mate. And she was dying in the snow outside his palace while he'd been inside listening to meaningless toasts. The roar that tore from his throat shook the palace foundations. Windows rattled. Snow cascaded from the eaves. Guards on the walls ducked, hands over their ears. Rodney scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body frozen solid, and stood. His wolf was howling, a sound of grief and rage that threatened to split his skull. He turned back toward the palace and ran. He hit the ballroom doors with his shoulder, kicking them open with such force the hinges shrieked and wood splintered. The doors crashed inward, one hanging crooked on broken hardware. The music had resumed in his absence. Now it died instantly. Every conversation stopped. 300 nobles turned to stare as their king strode into the ballroom carrying a frozen Omega in his arms, snow melting into the marble floor, his eyes blazing gold, his face a mask of barely controlled violence. He walked straight to the high table and laid her body across it, shoving aside crystal goblets and gold-rimmed plates. They crashed to the floor. Wine and food splattered across priceless rugs. He didn't care. Who did this? His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every wolf in the room heard the death promise in those 3 words. The silence was absolute. Not a breath. Not a movement. Rodney's eyes swept the crowd, taking in every face, reading every micro-expression. Fear. Confusion. Shock. And there. Guilt. High Beta Duchess Vivian stood near the orchestra platform, her crimson gown vivid against her suddenly bloodless face. Her champagne flute trembled in her hand. She couldn't hold his gaze, her eyes sliding away, her throat working as she swallowed. And Rodney knew. His wolf knew. She had done this. She had killed his mate. His lips pulled back from his fangs in a snarl that promised her death would not be quick. Seize her. The command cracked through the ballroom like a whip. 6 of Rodney's elite guard moved instantly, converging on Vivian from different angles. She stumbled backward, her champagne flute shattering on the marble, her face a mask of terror. My king, I haven't. And the 2 guards who carried her outside. Rodney's voice was utterly calm now, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Bring them to me. Now. The guards hesitated only a heartbeat before 2 of them peeled away, heading for the servants' corridors. Vivian was dragged forward, her crimson gown trailing across the floor, her carefully styled hair coming loose. She was shaking so hard her jewelry rattled. Royal healer Lysander, attend to her. Rodney gestured to Margarita's frozen body without taking his eyes off Vivian. Save her. Whatever it takes. An elderly wolf with silver hair and sharp gray eyes rushed forward, his medical bag already in hand. He began working immediately, pressing his fingers to Margarita's throat, muttering under his breath as he pulled out vials and blankets. The ballroom had become a tableau of frozen nobles, everyone too terrified to move, too shocked to speak. The orchestra stood with instruments half-raised. Servants pressed themselves against walls. This wasn't the controlled, calculating king they knew. This was something primal that their instincts recognized and feared. The two guards were dragged in young wolves in palace livery, both already pale with the understanding of what was coming. Rodney stepped toward Vivian, and she flinched so violently she nearly fell. He caught her chin in one hand, forcing her to meet his gold-blazed eyes, and when he spoke, alpha command rolled through his voice like thunder. Tell me everything you did to her. The command hit her like a physical force. Her will crumbled. Her mouth opened and words spilled out in a desperate rush. 3 years, I've been tormenting her for 3 years. Isolation. Made sure no one spoke to her. Spread rumors she was plotting against you. Had the kitchen staff put wolf's bane in her food to keep her weak, keep her from shifting. I wanted her broken. Wanted her gone. Tears streamed down Vivian's face, but the words kept coming, dragged out by the alpha command she couldn't resist. She was supposed to be nothing. A hostage. Forgotten. But tonight you kept looking at her. 3 times. I saw you watching her and I knew if I didn't act, you might actually notice her. Might choose her over me. The confession hung in the air like poison. So you decided to kill her. Rodney's voice was conversational. Almost pleasant. You drugged her wine. Had these two drag her outside. Left her to freeze to death while we all celebrated inside. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. Rodney released her chin and turned to the 2 guards. They dropped to their knees instantly, foreheads pressed to the marble. Please, Your Majesty. We were following orders. She said you approved. Rodney's claws extended fully. The transformation was instantaneous. One moment he stood in formal attire, the next his hand had shifted, bone and muscle restructuring into something designed to kill. He struck. The first guard's head separated from his shoulders before he could scream. The second barely had time to gasp before Rodney's claws tore through his throat. Blood sprayed across white marble, pooling and spreading, the copper scent thick in the air. Nobles screamed. Some turned away. Others stood frozen in horror. A duchess near the front fainted, her body crumpling in a rustle of silk. Rodney straightened, blood dripping from his claws, and turned back to Vivian. She was sobbing now, her legs giving out, held upright only by the guards gripping her arms. You gave her a death by cold. His voice was soft, almost gentle. Conscious. Aware. Helpless. So that's the death you'll receive. Take her outside. Strip her to her undergarments. Let her feel every second as the cold takes her. And if anyone interferes, if anyone tries to help her, they join her in the snow. No, please, Your Majesty, please. Vivian's screams escalated to shrieks as the guards began dragging her toward the doors. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please. Not like this. Not. The doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her screams. But everyone in the ballroom could still hear them, fading as she was dragged farther from the palace, out into the killing cold. Is he insane? Someone whispered. That's Mate Bond Justice, an older alpha said quietly. Primal law. She tried to kill his fated mate. But the brutality. Would you do less if someone tried to murder yours? Rodney ignored them all and returned to the high table where Lysander worked frantically over Margarita's body. How bad? The healer's face was grim. Severe hypothermia. Her core temperature is dangerously low. Her heart rate is barely there, once every 3 seconds when it should be twice that. Frostbite on her fingers and toes, possibly permanent damage. He looked up, meeting Rodney's eyes. My king, I need you to prepare yourself. Even if we warm her slowly, carefully, there's a significant chance we'll lose her. The cold, she was out there too long. Something cracked in Rodney's chest. No. Your Majesty. No. He scooped Margarita into his arms, cradling her frozen body against his chest. She doesn't get to die. I won't allow it. He carried her from the ballroom, his blood-stained hands gentle against her frozen skin, leaving a trail of melting snow and crimson footprints across marble floors. Lysander followed with his medical supplies, barking orders at assistants. In his private chambers, Rodney laid her in his bed, the massive four-poster where no one else had ever slept. He covered her with furs, built up the fire until the room was stifling, and for the first time in his 5-year reign, the Alpha King who'd never bowed to anyone dropped to his knees. Please. His voice cracked. Moon goddess, fate, whatever powers govern this world, please. She can't die. Not before I've even learned who she is. Not before I've protected her the way I should have from the beginning. His hand found hers beneath the furs, her fingers like ice. Margarita. Fight. Come back. I'm here now. I've got you. Just fight. And in the suffocating warmth of the king's chambers, he waited. Warmth. That was the first thing Margarita felt as consciousness returned, real warmth, the kind that sank into bones and chased away the terrible memory of cold. Her fingers tingled with returning circulation, painful but bearable. She could feel soft furs against her skin, hear the crackle of a fire, smell cedarwood and something distinctly male. Her eyes flew open. She was in a bed. Not her small room in the servants' wing, but a massive four-poster with burgundy curtains and more pillows than one person could ever need. Firelight danced across dark wood paneling and tapestries depicting ancient battles. This wasn't just any chamber. This was, "You're awake." Margarita's head snapped toward the voice. Alpha King Rodney Saladino sat in a chair beside the bed, still wearing his formal jacket though it was rumpled now, stained with what looked like dried blood. His crown sat discarded on a side table. Dark circles shadowed his amber eyes, and his jaw was rough with 2 days of stubble. He looked like he hadn't slept in that entire time. Terror shot through her. The last thing she remembered was the cold, the snow, the certainty of death. And now she was in the king's bed, which could only mean. Please, she whispered, her voice raw and broken. Please, I don't know what I did wrong, but I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Just don't hurt Isabel. Please. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps. Or anger, though not directed at her. You did nothing wrong, he said quietly. And no one is going to hurt your sister. Or you. Not anymore. Margarita tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Everything ached. Her hands were wrapped in bandages, and when she looked down, she saw her fingers were an angry red with patches of purple. Frostbite, Rodney said. The healer says you'll keep all your fingers, but it was close. You were dying when I found you. Found me? Fragments of memory surfaced. The wine tasting wrong. The room spinning. Being dragged. The door. The cold. Vivian, she is dead. His voice was flat, final. I executed her 2 nights ago. Her and the guards who threw you into the snow. Margarita's breath caught. Vivian was dead. The woman who'd made her life hell for 3 years was simply gone. I don't understand. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't have the strength to stop. Why would you care? I'm no one. Just a hostage who. You're my mate. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible words. Terrifying words. No. She shook her head weakly. That's not, I can't be. The mate bond doesn't lie. Rodney leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I felt it the moment you were dying. My wolf knew. And when I carried you back into that ballroom, every wolf there felt the truth of it. Margarita closed her eyes. This was worse than death. Because mate bonds meant claims, and claims meant forever, and she'd spent 3 years learning that forever in this palace meant nothing but pain. I know you're afraid. His voice was gentler than she'd ever heard from him, gentle in a way she hadn't thought him capable of. 3 years you've been here, and I never noticed you. Never protected you. I failed you before I even knew you existed. He paused. But I see you now, Margarita. And I need you to tell me the truth about everything. Not what you think I want to hear. The truth. Why? The word came out broken. Because you're mine to protect now. And I can't protect you from threats I don't understand. Something in his tone made her look at him, really look at him. The exhaustion etched into his face. The blood on his clothes. The way his hands trembled slightly as though he'd been holding them steady through sheer will for too long and was finally allowing himself to break. They told me you were a guest, he continued. That your family's integration was peaceful. That you chose to stay at court. His amber eyes locked onto hers. Was any of that true? No. The confession slipped out before she could stop it. None of it. Tell me. So she did. The words tumbled out in a rush, how the Duchess of Wintermarch had taken 14-year-old Isabel the day their territory fell. How Margarita was given a choice, come to the palace as a guest and endure whatever they demanded, or Isabel would be killed. How she'd been systematically isolated, tormented, drugged with wolf's bane to keep her weak. How she'd sent every coin she could scrape together to the Duchess to pay for Isabel's care, hoping that compliance would keep her sister alive. 3 years, she whispered. I haven't seen her in 3 years. I don't even know if she's still alive. The Duchess sends me letters sometimes, just to prove she has her, but... Rodney's growl cut her off. It rumbled through the room like distant thunder, making the flames in the fireplace flicker. When she looked at him, his eyes had shifted to gold, his canines lengthening. The Duchess of Wintermarch. Each word was precisely enunciated, dripping with lethal promise. Has been holding your sister hostage. For 3 years. While I was told your family willingly surrendered their territory and that you were honored to be at my court. It's not your fault. It is exactly my fault. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I've been so focused on consolidating power, on strategic alliances and political stability, that I didn't notice an Omega hostage being tortured in my own palace. I didn't notice nobles running trafficking operations under my nose. He slammed his fist into the stone windowsill, and Margarita heard the crack of bone. I didn't notice anything. He turned back to her, blood dripping from his split knuckles, his eyes blazing gold. But I notice now. And here's what's going to happen. I'm going to rescue your sister. I'm going to bring her here, safe, where she belongs. And then I'm going to make the Duchess of Wintermarch pay for every moment of suffering she caused you both. His voice dropped to something low and dangerous. She will beg for death before I'm done. Margarita stared at him. In 3 years, no one had fought for her. No one had cared. And now the most dangerous wolf in the northern kingdoms was promising her vengeance and rescue with the certainty of someone who'd never failed at anything he'd set his mind to. Why? Her voice broke. Why would you do that for me? Rodney crossed back to the bed and knelt beside it, bringing himself to her eye level. His bloodied hand carefully, so carefully, touched her bandaged fingers. Because you're my mate. And I protect what's mine. His amber eyes softened. But more than that, because you deserve it. You've survived 3 years of hell to keep your sister safe. That's not weakness, Margarita. That's the kind of strength that makes queens. For the first time in 3 years, Margarita felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The news spread through the kingdom like wildfire through dry timber. Within 48 hours, every noble house from the southern coast to the northern tundra knew King Rodney Saladino had found his fated mate, executed a high beta in brutal fashion, and declared an Omega hostage as his future queen. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some noble houses sent letters of congratulation, recognizing the mate bond as sacred law that superseded all political considerations. Others remained cautiously silent, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. But 5 powerful houses saw not a king protecting his mate, but an opportunity. The Duke of Ironhold, the Duchess of Wintermarch, the Count of Blackwater, the Baron of Ashenfell, the Lord of Thornridge. 5 houses with armies, resources, and ambitions that had been kept in check by Rodney's iron rule. Now they smelled weakness. The letter arrived on the 4th day of Margarita's recovery, delivered by a messenger who barely made it past the palace gates before Rodney's guards seized him. The parchment was expensive, sealed with 5 different noble crests pressed into black wax. Rodney read it in his study while Margarita rested in his chambers. With each line, his expression grew colder, his eyes more gold, his grip on the parchment tight enough to crumple the edges. To His Majesty, King Rodney Saladino. We write as loyal subjects concerned for the stability of the realm. Your recent actions, the brutal execution of High Beta Vivian and the elevation of an Omega hostage to the position of queen, have shocked the kingdom and violated centuries of tradition. We understand the mate bond is powerful, but a king must place duty above desire. The Omega Margarita Epperly is unsuitable as queen due to her low rank, questionable loyalty, and lack of proper breeding. We demand the following: renounce the mate bond publicly. Choose a proper highborn mate from an established noble house. Restore order to the court. Should you refuse, we will be forced to take action to preserve the kingdom's integrity. We have the support of multiple noble houses and significant military resources. Civil war would be tragic, but we will not allow one Omega to destroy the social order that has kept this realm strong for generations. To prove our seriousness, we include evidence of our leverage. You have 7 days to comply. The Alliance of 5 Houses. Attached to the letter was a portrait done in charcoal. A young girl, perhaps 17 now, with Margarita's platinum hair and delicate features, but with terror in her eyes that no child should know. She sat on a stone floor in what looked like a cell, and around her neck was a silver collar attached to a chain. Her wrists bore bruises. Her dress was little more than rags. Isabel. Rodney stared at the portrait for a long moment, committing every detail to memory. Then he stood, walked to Margarita's door, and knocked softly. "Come in," her voice called, still weak but stronger than days ago. She was sitting up in bed, wrapped in furs, her bandaged hands resting on a book one of the servants had brought her. She looked fragile still, but there was color returning to her cheeks. When she saw his face, her expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" He handed her the letter and the portrait. He watched her read, watched her face drain of color, watched her hands begin to tremble. When she got to the portrait, a sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a gasp. "Isabel," she whispered. "She's so thin." Her eyes lifted to his, already filled with desperate determination. "I'll do it. Whatever they want. I'll renounce the mate bond. I'll leave. I'll disappear. Just please get her out safely first. Please." "No." The word was flat, absolute, allowing no argument. Margarita's eyes widened. "You don't understand. They'll kill her. If you don't comply, they'll do nothing." Rodney crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, taking her bandaged hands in his carefully. "Because I'm not negotiating with them. I'm not renouncing you. And I'm certainly not letting you sacrifice yourself for their political games. But Isabel will be rescued." His amber eyes blazed with cold fury. "Within the week. I promise you that." He gestured to the letter. "This alliance, 5 houses thinking they can threaten their king, they've made a tactical error. They've revealed themselves, shown me exactly who my enemies are, and given me a target. They have armies," Margarita whispered. "They said they'd start a civil war. Let them try." His voice dropped to something savage and certain. "I will burn this kingdom to ash before I let you go. Your sister will be freed, and those who took her will beg for the mercy of a quick death." He squeezed her hands gently. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? I'm not choosing between you and my throne. I'm choosing both. And anyone who stands in the way of that will be destroyed." Margarita stared at him, this fierce king who'd barely known her a week but was ready to wage war for her, and something shifted in her chest. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and strengthening. How? She asked. How do we fight them? The use of "we" made his expression soften slightly. Carefully. Strategically. I need allies I can trust, houses that support mate bond rights and resent the alliance's power grab. I need evidence of their crimes to turn public opinion against them. And I need a strike team capable of extracting your sister from Wintermarch territory before they realize what's happening. He stood, his strategic mind already mapping out approaches, resources, timelines. But first, we secure you. I'm moving you to the Queen's chambers with a full guard rotation. And starting tomorrow, you begin training. Training in combat. Politics. How to read a room and identify threats. How to access your wolf now that the wolf's bane is out of your system. His eyes met hers with fierce intensity. You spent 3 years learning to be invisible and powerless. Now I'm going to teach you to be a queen. Because when we bring your sister home, when we dismantle this rebellion, you're going to be standing beside me, not behind me, not hidden as my equal. Margarita felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of determination. When do we start? Rodney's smile was predatory and proud. Now. The Queen's chambers were 3 times the size of the servants' quarters Margarita had occupied for 3 years, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the palace gardens and mountains beyond. Silk wallpaper in cream and gold. A bed that could sleep 4. A private bathing room with heated water. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. For guards at all times, Rodney said, gesturing to the wolves stationed at her door. 2 inside, 2 outside. They're my most loyal, handpicked from my personal guard. They answer only to me, and their orders are simple: keep you safe, keep you alive. Margarita stood in the center of the room, still feeling like an imposter. This is too much. This is the bare minimum. He crossed to her, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. You're going to be queen, Margarita. It's time you started living like one. The training began the next morning. Not with etiquette lessons or proper curtsies, but in the palace's private training yard before dawn. Rodney's weapons master, a scarred female alpha named Kara with silver-shot hair and arms like iron, looked Margarita up and down with unconcealed skepticism. She's too thin. Too weak. This will take months. We have 3 weeks, Rodney said flatly. Make it work. Kara grunted. Fine. But when she collapses, don't blame me. Margarita didn't collapse. She refused to. Every morning she trained until her muscles screamed, learning to throw a punch, to move her weight, to identify vulnerabilities. Kara was merciless but fair, and when Margarita landed her first real hit, a solid strike to Kara's ribs that made the older woman grunt, there was approval in those hard eyes. Not bad, little queen. Not bad at all. The afternoons were different. Rodney would summon her to his study, spread maps and letters across his desk, and teach her to read the political landscape like a battlefield. Which houses owed favors to whom? Which alliances were genuine and which were convenience? How to spot lies in formal correspondence. Here. He pointed to a letter from the Count of Blackwater. 3 paragraphs of flowery loyalty. But look at the wording. As your humble servant in these trying times. Why trying times? What's trying about them unless you're planning to make them trying? Margarita studied the letter, seeing patterns she'd never noticed before. He's hedging. Keeping his options open in case the rebellion succeeds. Exactly. Rodney's smile was fierce and proud. You're learning. But the most important training happened at sunset on the 15th day, in a private clearing deep in the palace forest. Rodney had cleared it of all guards, all witnesses. Just the 2 of them. Your wolf, he said quietly. When did you last shift? 3 years ago. The day I arrived. Margarita wrapped her arms around herself. I tried once after that, but nothing happened. The wolf's bane is out of your system now. Your wolf is there, Margarita. She's been waiting. You just need to reach for her. I don't remember how. Rodney shifted then, his transformation smooth and instantaneous. One moment the king stood before her, the next a massive wolf with dark fur and amber eyes that glowed in the fading light. He was beautiful and terrifying, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, built for dominance and power. He patted closer, his large head level with her chest, and pressed his muzzle against her hand. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. Trust yourself, his voice whispered through the mate bond they were still learning to use. Trust me. Let her out. Margarita closed her eyes and reached inward, down to that place where her wolf had lived before the drugs, before the fear. For a moment there was nothing. Then, a spark. A flicker of consciousness that wasn't quite her own. Sister, the voice whispered. We've waited so long. The shift took her like a wave, painful and exhilarating all at once. Bones restructured, muscles reformed, her perspective shifting as she dropped to 4 legs instead of 2. When she opened her eyes, now ice blue and sharp with predator focus, the world had transformed into scents and sounds and instincts she'd forgotten she had. She looked down at her paws. White fur, pure as fresh snow. Rodney's wolf circled her once, approval radiating from him through the bond. Then he tilted his head back and howled, a sound of triumph and possession that echoed through the forest. Margarita's wolf answered, and the sound that came from her throat was fierce and free. They ran together through the forest until moonrise, and when they finally shifted back to human form, breathless and exhilarated, Rodney pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was not gentle. It was claiming and promise and partnership all at once. You're magnificent, he said against her lips. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. His smile was sharp. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it control you anymore. The evidence arrived in pieces over those 3 weeks, delivered by Rodney's extensive spy network. Financial records showing the Duke of Ironhold had been embezzling kingdom funds for 5 years, nearly 1 million gold crowns diverted to his personal coffers. Correspondence between the Count of Blackwater and foreign powers, discussing invasion plans in exchange for territory. Reports from escaped Omegas describing the Duchess of Wintermarch's trafficking operation, young wolves bought and sold, bred like livestock, their families told they'd died. And Isabel's name on the ledgers. Captive 247. Age acquired, 14. Status, high-value hostage. There were 12 others held with her. 12 more Isabels. Margarita stood in Rodney's study, staring at the documents spread across his desk, and felt her wolf snarl beneath her skin. We have everything we need to destroy them publicly, Rodney said quietly. Financial crimes, treason, trafficking. The other noble houses will have no choice but to support us when they see this evidence. But if we reveal it before we rescue the captives, the Duchess kills them all to erase the evidence. His jaw clenched. Which means we strike first. Rescue mission, then public trial. Margarita looked at him, this king who'd transformed her from invisible hostage to partner in 3 weeks, who'd shown her the evidence and asked her opinion like it mattered, who'd helped her find her wolf and her strength. When do we leave? His amber eyes blazed with fierce approval. Tomorrow night. And Margarita. He took her hand, the one no longer bandaged, the one that had healed strong. You're coming with me. The strike team assembled in the palace armory at midnight, 20 of Rodney's most lethal warriors, each handpicked for their loyalty and skill. They moved with the quiet efficiency of wolves who'd trained together for years, checking weapons, strapping on light armor designed for speed over protection. Margarita stood among them in borrowed combat leathers, her platinum hair braided tight against her skull, a silver dagger at her hip. She looked out of place and exactly where she belonged all at once. No, Rodney said flatly when he saw her. Absolutely not. Yes. Her ice blue eyes met his without flinching. She's my sister. I've spent 3 years helpless, letting others fight my battles. Never again. This isn't a training exercise. People will die tonight. I know. Her hand moved to the dagger. Kara says I'm ready. And you promised to treat me as your equal. Was that a lie? The challenge hung between them. Several of the warriors exchanged glances, curious to see how their king would respond. Rodney studied her for a long moment, this woman who'd been invisible 3 weeks ago, now standing in combat gear demanding to fight beside him. The mate bond thrummed with her determination, her fear, and, underneath both, her absolute resolve. Stay close to me, he finally said. If I give you an order, you follow it instantly. Understood. Understood. His smile was predatory and proud. Then let's go get your sister. They moved through the forest in wolf form, 21 shadows flowing between trees under a moonless sky. Wintermarch Fortress sat on a hillside 20 miles from the palace, a squat stone structure built more for function than beauty, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Rodney's scouts had reported doubled patrols. The Duchess had been expecting this. Good. Let her be afraid. They shifted back to human form in the tree line, and Rodney's second-in-command, a massive alpha named Garrett, pointed to the patrol patterns. 20 guards visible. Likely another 10 inside. They're rotating every 15 minutes, no gaps. Then we make a gap. Rodney turned to his team. Garrett, take 5 and breach the north wall. Make noise, draw them that way. The rest with me, we go over the east wall while they're distracted. Fast, brutal, efficient. The priority is the captives in the cellar. Everything else is secondary. And the Duchess? Someone asked. Alive if possible. I want her to stand trial. His eyes glowed gold in the darkness. But if she threatens the captives, kill her. The assault began with controlled chaos. Garrett's team hit the north wall with explosive force, their battle cries echoing across the fortress. Guards rushed toward the breach, shouting orders, scrambling to defend. Rodney's team went over the east wall like ghosts. They dropped into the courtyard, and Rodney shifted mid-fall, his wolf form landing with predatory grace. His team followed his lead, a pack of lethal wolves pouring through the fortress. Guards who'd stayed behind turned, reaching for weapons, but they were already too late. Rodney's wolf tore through them with savage efficiency. This wasn't the controlled king, this was the primal alpha defending his mate's family, and mercy wasn't part of the equation. Blood splattered across stone. Screams cut short. Bodies fell. Margarita stayed close, her white wolf smaller, but vicious when a guard tried to flank Rodney. She took him down at the knees, her fangs finding his throat before he could raise his sword. Her first kill in combat. The blood tasted like copper and victory. They reached the cellar entrance, a heavy iron door with 3 locks. Rodney shifted back to human form long enough to tear the door off its hinges, the metal shrieking in protest. Then he was down the stairs, his team flowing behind him. The cellar was exactly what the intelligence had described: stone walls, hay-covered floor, and 13 young Omegas huddled in the corner wearing silver collars and chains. They were malnourished, filthy, their eyes wide with terror at the sudden invasion of wolves. Margarita shifted back and pushed through the warriors. Isabel. One of the girls looked up, 17 now instead of 14, her platinum hair matted, her face gaunt, but her eyes unmistakably the same. For a moment she didn't recognize the woman in combat leathers calling her name. Then comprehension dawned. Rita? The childhood nickname came out broken. How? Margarita crossed the distance and pulled her sister into her arms, sobbing openly. I'm here. I've got you. You're safe now. The Duchess, she'll kill you, she said if anyone tried. The Duchess, a cold voice said from the cellar stairs, is right here. Everyone turned. The Duchess of Wintermarch stood at the top of the stairs in a silk dressing gown, her gray hair loose, a crossbow in her hands aimed directly at Isabel. You've made a terrible mistake, Your Majesty. Her voice was steady despite the chaos outside. "Drop your weapons, or I put a bolt through the girl's heart." Rodney's warriors froze, looking to their king. But Rodney was looking at Margarita, whose expression had gone cold and deadly. "You should have run," Margarita said quietly. The shift happened faster than the Duchess could track. One moment Margarita knelt beside her sister. The next her white wolf launched across the cellar, a blur of fur and fury. The crossbow fired, but Margarita was already airborne, the bolt passing harmlessly through the space she'd occupied. She hit the Duchess chest high, driving her backward onto the stairs. The woman screamed, raising her arms to protect her face, but Margarita's fangs found her throat with surgical precision. The scream cut off in a wet gurgle. It was over in seconds. Margarita shifted back, blood dripping from her mouth, standing over the Duchess's body with cold satisfaction in her ice-blue eyes. She looked feral and regal all at once, a queen who'd just executed judgment. Rodney crossed to her and cupped her face, his thumb wiping blood from her lips. "Magnificent." The pride in his voice, in his eyes, in the mate bond pulsing between them, told her everything she needed to know. She wasn't just his mate. She was his equal. His partner in blood and battle. They extracted the captives within the hour, breaking their collars and carrying those too weak to walk. By the time they reached the palace at dawn, news had already spread. The king had personally led a raid on Winter March, rescued 13 Omega captives, and killed the Duchess who'd been trafficking them. The rebellion's leverage had just become its death sentence. The Grand Council convened 3 days after the Winter March raid, and the throne room had never been so packed. Representatives from every noble house in the kingdom filled the space, dukes and duchesses, counts and barons, their retainers and advisors. Emissaries from allied territories stood along the walls, their presence lending international weight to the proceedings. Nearly 400 witnesses crammed into a room built for half that number. Rodney sat on his throne in full regalia, crown gleaming, the picture of royal authority. Margarita sat beside him in a chair that had been empty for 5 years, the queen's seat, wearing a gown of white and silver that marked her status. Isabel and the other rescued Omegas sat in places of honor near the front, visible to everyone. The message was clear. This wasn't just a trial. This was a reckoning. "We are gathered," Rodney's voice carried across the silent room, "to address treason, embezzlement, conspiracy with foreign powers, and crimes against Omega citizens of this kingdom." He gestured, and his guards brought forward the Duke of Ironhold in chains, along with the Count of Blackwater, the Baron of Ashenfell, and the Lord of Thornridge. "These nobles sent me a letter 3 weeks ago, demanding I renounce my mate bond and threatening civil war. Today, they will answer for that threat and for the crimes that motivated it." He nodded to his treasurer, who began presenting evidence. Financial records projected on large displays, showing systematic embezzlement. 5 years of kingdom funds, nearly 2 million gold crowns, diverted to noble house coffers. The audience murmured, shock rippling through the crowd. Then came the correspondence. Letters between the rebel houses and foreign powers, discussing invasion plans, territory divisions, promises of support. The murmurs became gasps. This wasn't just rebellion, this was treason of the highest order. But the testimonies were what shattered the room's composure. Isabel stood first, her voice shaking but clear. "I was 14 when the Duchess of Wintermarch took me. She told my sister that if Margarita didn't obey every command, didn't endure every humiliation, I would be killed. For 3 years I lived in chains, watching other Omegas bought and sold like livestock. 12 of us survived. There were others who didn't." One by one, the rescued Omegas testified. Stories of families torn apart, of children stolen, of systematic abuse that had been happening for years while the kingdom looked away. By the time the last witness finished, several nobles were openly weeping. "The Duchess of Wintermarch is dead," Rodney said into the heavy silence. killed while attempting to murder her captives during their rescue. But before she died, she kept records. He held up a leather ledger. Transaction logs. Payments received. And most importantly, the names of her partners in this operation. He read from the ledger, and every name belonged to a member of the Rebel Alliance. The Duke of Ironhold lurched forward in his chains. These are lies. Fabrications designed to silence. The Alpha Command crashed through the room like a physical force. Even nobles not directly involved dropped their eyes in submission. Rodney descended from his throne, approaching the Duke with predatory grace. You will speak only truth in my presence. Who conspired with you in the trafficking operation? The Duke's face went red, then purple as he fought the compulsion. But Alpha command from a king was absolute. The Count, the Baron, we all knew. The Duchess ran the operation, but we provided her with territories to operate in, protection from investigation. We profited from the sales. The throne room erupted. Nobles shouted in outrage. Several representatives from allied territories stood, their expressions disgusted. The carefully cultivated support for the rebellion crumbled in seconds. You see now, Rodney said, his voice cutting through the chaos, what they truly are. Not noble houses concerned with tradition, but criminals who saw my mate bond as a threat to their criminal enterprise. Enough of this. The Duke of Ironhold's roar silenced the room. His eyes blazed gold, his body beginning to shift. You want war, Saladino? You'll have it. He transformed mid-sentence, his wolf form massive and battle-scarred. And suddenly the throne room was full of wolves, 50 armed men who'd been hidden among the observers, now shifting and attacking, their allegiance to the Duke clear. Chaos erupted. Rodney's guards engaged instantly, forming a protective barrier around the throne. Nobles screamed and scrambled for exits. Emissaries drew weapons or shifted, uncertain which side they were protecting. Rodney shifted, his massive black wolf meeting the Duke's charge head-on. They collided with bone-crushing force, fangs and claws tearing, blood spraying across marble floors. Margarita grabbed Isabel and the other Omegas, herding them behind the throne where Rodney's personal guard formed a shield wall. Her hand found the dagger at her hip, her wolf snarling beneath her skin, ready to shift if any threat came close. The battle was vicious but short. Rodney's forces were better trained, more disciplined, and fighting for their king rather than a doomed rebellion. One by one, the rebel wolves fell, some dead, others injured and surrendering. Rodney and the Duke fought like legends, two alphas battling for dominance. The Duke was older, more experienced, fighting with desperate fury. But Rodney was faster, smarter, and fighting for something more powerful than pride. He was fighting for his mate. The Duke lunged, going for Rodney's throat. Rodney twisted, letting the attack slide past, then struck, his jaws closing around the Duke's neck, his weight bearing them both down. The Duke thrashed, claws raking, but Rodney's grip was unbreakable. The throne room fell silent, watching their king deliver justice in its most primal form. The Duke's struggles weakened. Stopped. Rodney held on for 3 more seconds, ensuring death, then released the body and shifted back to human form. He stood covered in blood, his own and others, breathing hard, his amber eyes scanning the room. Anyone else? His voice was deadly quiet. The surviving rebels dropped to their knees in surrender. And one by one, the noble houses present rose to their feet and bowed. Long live the king, someone called. Long live Queen Margarita, another voice added. The throne room echoed with their loyalty, and Rodney returned to Margarita's side, taking her hand in his blood-stained one. Justice had been served. The executions took place at dawn in the palace courtyard, witnessed by representatives from every corner of the kingdom. The Count of Blackwater, the Baron of Ashenfell, the Lord of Thornridge, and 15 other conspirators who'd actively participated in the trafficking or the throne room attack. Swift, public, final. But Rodney offered something unprecedented alongside the justice, Mercy for those who hadn't known, who'd been manipulated, who could prove they'd acted under duress. The families of the executed nobles weren't punished beyond stripping their titles. Lower-ranking conspirators who provided testimony and cooperation received reduced sentences or pardons. Punish the guilty, Rodney announced from the palace steps, but don't create a generation of martyrs and vendetta seekers. That's how civil wars start. It was Margarita's influence showing through, her understanding that cycles of violence only bred more violence, that true strength lay in knowing when to show mercy. The Omega Protection Decree came next, signed into law 3 days after the executions. Trafficking, abuse, forced breeding, or systematic oppression of Omegas were now capital crimes, punishable by death. Any Omega who reported abuse would receive immediate royal protection and asylum. Any family who lost an Omega to trafficking would receive compensation from the crown. But the most revolutionary change was the Royal Council expansion. Rodney established 5 new seats specifically for Omega representatives, wolves elected by Omega communities across the kingdom to bring their concerns directly to the crown's attention. For the first time in the kingdom's 1,000-year history, the most vulnerable had voices in governance. They'll say you've gone soft, one of Rodney's advisors warned. That you're letting your mate influence policy too much. Good. Rodney's smile was sharp. Let them underestimate us. It'll make destroying them easier. The confiscated assets from the rebel houses were massive estates, gold reserves, trade contracts. Rodney redistributed it all. Isabel and each of the rescued Omegas received a manor house, enough land to sustain them, and sufficient funds to never need to depend on anyone again. Other trafficking victims who came forward, and there were dozens once word spread, received similar support. You're creating an entire new class of landed Omegas, the treasurer protested. This disrupts centuries of social structure. That's the point, Margarita said quietly from her seat beside Rodney. The old structure enabled what happened to us. It's time for something new. The treasurer bowed and implemented the changes without further complaint. Isabel healed slowly under the care of royal physicians and Margarita's constant attention. The physical injuries were easy: proper food, warm quarters, medicine for infections. The psychological wounds went deeper. I keep expecting to wake up back in that cell, Isabel admitted one afternoon as they walked the palace gardens. She was 17 but looked younger, still too thin despite weeks of regular meals. I keep thinking this is a dream and she'll come back. She won't. Margarita squeezed her sister's hand. She's dead. I killed her myself. And even if she wasn't, Rodney would burn the world down before letting anyone hurt you again. He really loves you. It wasn't a question. He really does. Margarita smiled, the expression still feeling new on her face. And I love him. Which I didn't think was possible 4 weeks ago. They sat on a bench surrounded by winter roses, flowers that bloomed in the cold, beautiful and resilient. Like them. Do you remember what Mother used to say? Isabel asked. About Omega strength? We survive by adapting, but we thrive by refusing to break. Margarita recited the words from memory. I forgot that for a while. Spent 3 years just surviving. But you're thriving now. Isabel leaned against her sister's shoulder. You're going to be queen. Actually queen, with a crown and everything. We're going to be fine, Margarita corrected. Both of us. Together. Margarita's transformation from hostage to queen became apparent in the daily governance of the kingdom. She attended every council meeting, her questions sharp and insightful, her suggestions carefully considered by nobles who'd once ignored her existence. She met with Omega representatives, listening to their concerns with genuine attention, advocating for policy changes that Rodney implemented with pride. You're better at the diplomatic parts than I am, he admitted one evening in their shared chambers. They'd stopped pretending to maintain separate rooms weeks ago. I want to solve every problem with direct action. You see the nuance I miss. And you handle the problems that need direct action. Margarita traced the mate mark on his shoulder, the claiming bite she'd given him after the throne room battle. "We balance each other." "We do." He pulled her closer, his hand settling possessively on her waist. "My fierce queen." The mate bond between them had deepened beyond the initial physical pull into something profound, a connection where she could feel his emotions, sense his location, communicate silently across distances. When he was stressed, she could soothe him. When she was afraid, his presence anchored her. They claimed each other completely on the winter solstice, 6 weeks after he'd found her dying in the snow. The bond sealed with a finality that made them one in ways that transcended physical or political union. The kingdom's acceptance came gradually but genuinely. Nobles who'd been skeptical watched Margarita navigate complex negotiations with grace, watched her advocate for the vulnerable without destroying the powerful, watched her transform their king from a cold tactician into a leader who balanced strength with compassion. She earned it, one duke admitted to another at a council session. Not through birth or luck, but through actually surviving and becoming stronger. That's queen material. Preparation for the formal coronation began 8 weeks after the trial. A ceremony that would make Margarita officially queen before the entire realm, not just as Rodney's mate, but as a sovereign ruler in her own right. "Ready?" Rodney asked as they reviewed the ceremony plans. Margarita looked at him, this fierce king who'd saved her, fought for her, seen her at her weakest, and helped her find her strength. "I'm ready." The winter solstice arrived exactly 1 year after Margarita had nearly died in the snow, and the grand cathedral had never held so many souls. Every pew was packed with noble houses and common wolves alike, their formal attire a sea of jewel tones and winter whites. Foreign dignitaries from allied kingdoms stood along the walls, their presence acknowledging this wasn't just a coronation, it was a statement that the northern kingdoms had fundamentally changed. The cathedral's stained glass windows cast colored light across ancient stone, and evergreen boughs hung from every column, filling the air with the scent of winter forests. 1,000 candles burned, their flames reflected in the eyes of wolves who'd come to witness history. Margarita stood in the preparation chamber, barely recognizing herself in the floor-length mirror. The gown was pure white silk that seemed to glow in the candlelight, embroidered with silver thread in patterns of wolves and winter roses. Her platinum hair was swept up in an intricate style woven with diamonds and pearls. And the crown, moon goddess, the crown was a masterpiece of diamonds and moonstones that caught the light like captured starlight. She was no longer the invisible ghost in an outdated gown. She was radiant, powerful, sovereign. "You look like you were born for this," Isabel said softly, adjusting the train of Margarita's gown. Her sister had filled out in the past 2 months, the haunted look fading from her eyes, replaced by something stronger. She wore a gown of ice blue silk, her hair styled to match Margarita's, a princess in her own right now. "I feel terrified," Margarita admitted. "Good." Isabel smiled. Rita always said the best leaders are the ones who understand the weight of what they're taking on. The cathedral bells rang, signaling it was time. Margarita processed down the aisle to the sound of an orchestra and a choir of 200 voices singing ancient hymns to the moon goddess. Every eye tracked her movement. Every wolf felt the power radiating from her, not borrowed from Rodney, but earned through survival and transformation. Rodney stood at the altar in formal regalia of black and gold, his crown gleaming atop his dark hair, and the look in his amber eyes as she approached made her breath catch. Fierce pride. Possessive devotion. Love so powerful it resonated through their mate bond like a physical touch. The high priestess, an ancient wolf with silver hair and eyes that had seen centuries, performed the traditional ceremony. Blessings and prayers, anointing with sacred oils, the presentation of the crown. But when it came time for the vows, Rodney stepped forward, ignoring the prepared script entirely. "I crown you queen," his voice carried through the cathedral, "not because you are my mate, but because you are the strongest wolf I have ever known." He took the crown from the high priestess and held it, his eyes never leaving Margarita's. You survived what would have broken others. You protected your sister at the cost of your own freedom. You fought beside me when you could have run. You chose courage over fear, justice over vengeance, leadership over safety. He placed the crown on her head, the weight of it settling like destiny. You are my queen, my mate, my equal. And I vow before the moon goddess and this kingdom that I will spend every day of my life being worthy of you. Margarita's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was strong and clear when she spoke her own vows. I accept this crown not for power, but for purpose. I vow to use my voice for those who have none, to protect the vulnerable, to ensure no one else endures what I endured. She reached up and touched his face gently. I vow to stand beside my king, to counsel him with truth, to build a kingdom where strength means protection. And I vow to never forget where I came from, so I never lose sight of where we're going. The claiming bite came next, public and final. Rodney tilted her head gently to the side and marked her before hundreds of witnesses, his fangs piercing the mate mark he'd already given her, renewing it, sealing it permanently. Then she did the same to him, her own mark on his shoulder a mirror of his on her neck. The mate bond flared between them like sunlight, visible to every wolf present as a golden glow that surrounded them both. Then they shifted. Rodney's massive black wolf stood proud and powerful beside Margarita's ethereal white wolf, and together they tilted their heads back and howled. The sound echoed through the cathedral, primal and pure, and the entire congregation howled with them, nobles and commoners, alphas and omegas, all united in recognition of their king and queen. The feast that followed filled the palace ballroom where this had all begun. But everything had transformed. Margarita sat beside Rodney at the high table, not behind him, not below him, but beside him as his equal. Isabel sat at her other side, wearing a silver circlet that marked her as a royal princess, no longer a captive but family. Throughout the evening, wolves approached to offer congratulations and thanks. But the moment that mattered most came when a young Omega, barely 16, with nervous eyes, approached the high table and dropped into a curtsy. "Your Majesty," she addressed Margarita, "I wanted to thank you. The Omega Protection Decree, my uncle was hurting me. For years. But I was too afraid to tell anyone because he said no one would believe in Omega over a beta." Tears streamed down her face. "But then you passed the law, and I reported him, and the royal investigators came, and he was arrested. You saved me. You saved so many of us." Margarita descended from the high table and pulled the girl into an embrace. "You saved yourself by being brave enough to speak," she said softly. "I just made sure someone was listening." Later, as the celebration continued below, Rodney and Margarita stood on the balcony overlooking their kingdom. Snow fell gently, no longer deadly but beautiful, each flake catching moonlight like tiny diamonds. 1 year ago, Margarita said quietly, "I was dying in that snow. Certain no one would notice. Certain I didn't matter." "You were wrong." Rodney wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her crowned head. "You mattered then. You matter now. And you'll matter for the next 1,000 years of stories they tell about the Omega who became queen and changed everything." She leaned back against him, feeling the mate bond pulse between them, partnership, devotion, unshakable commitment. "We changed everything," she corrected. "Together." Below them, their kingdom stretched out in the winter night, a realm where the crown served the people, where Omegas had power and voice, where no one would be left to freeze in the snow alone. Where a king's greatest strength was his fierce devotion to his mate, and a queen's greatest power was her refusal to let suffering go unanswered. They had built something new from blood and ash and survival. And they would protect it together for all the winters to come. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me, what moment hit you hardest? When Margarita lay freezing in the snow, certain no one would notice she was gone. When Rodney carried her frozen body into the feast hall and his roar of, "Who did this?" shattered the celebration. When she shifted into her white wolf for the first time in 3 years, finally free. Or when she took down the Duchess who'd tortured her sister, protecting Isabel with savage ferocity. Could you have stood in that ballroom wearing an outdated gown, enduring 3 years of invisible torment to keep your sister alive? Would you shift and fight beside your mate in a midnight raid, or take the throne knowing every noble in the kingdom questioned whether you deserved it? If this story of frozen survival and Omega strength resonated with you, hit subscribe for more tales where the powerless rise to power and kings learn that true strength means fierce protection. Until then, may you find warmth in the coldest winters, and may you always have someone willing to burn the world down to keep you safe.